If you're anything like me, then there are a few things that you like about fighting games. Big damage, insane combos, and really cool characters, and we'll be covering a game that ticks all of these boxes and more. First released in 2000 as a PS2 launch title, Street Fighter EX3 is a collaboration between Capcom and Arika, and the game is the final installment in the Street Fighter EX series. These three games are stone-cold classics, and I've had a lot of fun with the first two over the years, but I haven't played the third game in a long time, and even then I never really attempted to learn the game properly. EX3 was released during a time when the internet and its application in console games weren't really a thing, especially not like how it is nowadays, and even though the game's characters and animations appear instantly familiar to us in the present day, going back and playing EX3 made me feel like this game was released a whole lifetime ago. We have a lot to cover here, from the game's characters, mechanics, content, etc., so get ready to pull off a crazy super cancel, dear viewer, as we explore the realm of Street Fighter EX3. Before we get into the game's character roster, let's cover the base mechanics so we have an understanding of how the game is played in the first place. Like the mainline Street Fighter games, there are 6 attack buttons here, and you can press certain combinations of buttons to perform special attacks, like pressing both light attacks for throws for example. There are plenty of cool mechanics here, with the first one being brand new. In the previous EX games, you could perform an unblockable move that used some of your meter, but this has been changed for EX3. Instead of being unblockable, this is now an overhead, and it doesn't require any meter at all, so go wild. This move is called a surprise blow, and it's a great way of catching unaware opponents. Try incorporating this technique into your block strings to spice up your pressure. Another new mechanic is called the momentary combo, and this lets you cancel one special move into another. For example, if I do a Hadouken with Ryu and then press any kick button the moment that the fireball connects, Ryu will automatically transition into a Tatsu. This makes special cancels much easier than doing them manually, and you can even sneak in a surprise blow here if you want. Momentary combos remind me a lot of auto combos in modern fighting games, as they make doing basic combos with every character a breeze, and this can help players quickly learn the basics of any character. The other game mechanics return from EX1 and 2, but they're still just as fun in 3. The most basic of which is the cancel. Look, this is like Fighting Game 101. You can cancel the animations off your normal moves into specials, and this system is essentially the backbone of how fighting game combos work. Whether you're doing low forward into a fireball and neutral for some classic Street Fighter footsies, or you're doing a normal into whatever this move is, you can really net some meaningful damage through cancels. Also, if you have enough meter, you can cancel a super into another super, resulting in big damage. This is essentially the Street Fighter version of the Marvel vs. Capcom DHC, and it feels great no matter who you're playing as. One thing a good friend of mine told me recently is that if you make the enemy block Zangief's Stomp Super, you can cancel it into his SBD Super for a guaranteed hit. These are often used as combo enders, and they can quite often determine the outcome of a match. Finally, level 3 supers or meteor combos make a return. These require 3 bars of meter, but they can do jaw-dropping amounts of damage if you manage to land one, so I recommend going for this if it's guaranteed to connect. My favorite meteor combo in the game belongs to Zangief, as this guy literally jumps for the stars in his quest to pile drive your skull into dust. Every meteor combo in the game is extremely stylized, and they never fail to put a big grin on my face. They look great, they sound great, and they feel great to do, so they're a very crucial aspect of the game overall. Normally, in a more sensible fighting game, that would be all and we would be done with the mechanics, but we're still not done. Because the game developers were seemingly going crazy on opiates during the development of this game, they felt the need to include a tag team mode. That's right, there's a full-on tag mode here, and it even features its own unique mechanics. When both characters have at least 2 bars of meter, you can input quarter circle forward in both heavies to activate the awesomely named Critical Parade. Games like Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and Street Fighter Cross Tekken also feature this mechanic, but it's so cool to see here in the EX series. You also get infinite meter during a critical parade, so that means you can go stupid with supers. This can lead to all sorts of tricky shenanigans, and it simply never gets old. But what if both of your characters have full meter? What sorts of trickery can we get up to? How are we going to demolish the enemy and send them running back scared to their communist hellhole from whence they came? Well, you can do all that by doing the following. Meteor tag combos are perhaps the craziest moves in the whole game, and I don't know if you can tell, but they look pretty cool. However, there is a downside unfortunately, and it's not related to the meter costs. Not every character has a meteor tag combo associated with them, and the ones that do can only perform them with certain characters. For example, Ryu doesn't have one, but Ken does, so he has to initiate it. Even though Ryu is an active participant in the super, he can't start it under any circumstances. When you combine the high meter cost and strict activation requirements, you end up with a mechanic that looks and feels amazing, but isn't very likely to happen often in a real match. The final mechanic is called Emotional Flow, and it occurs when one of your characters goes down. The living character will gain their meter, now having up to 6 bars of meter. All of that is to say is that Street Fighter EX3 has a heavy focus on universal mechanics, but not in a way that homogenizes the entire cast. The characters here all feel unique and special, but these mechanics give them some extra tools that they may otherwise lack, like a standing overhead for example. Speaking of characters, let's get into them. There are 25 characters here, and they each look, sound, and play differently. I'm a sucker for grapplers in fighting games, so my go-to is always Zangief, and he's so much fun in the EX series, but look, I'm not going to start because I know I'll get carried away. Whether you like Shotos, Zoners, grapplers, or even weirdo characters like Skullomania, the variety provided here is simply outstanding, and picking up any character feels very natural. It's not too hard to figure out basic moves and strategies with any of them, and when you manage to land these, words can't describe how cool you feel. Characters also have multiple command normals, specials, and supers, so there's a lot to learn if you fancy yourself a multi-character specialist. A general rule of thumb I have is that the more familiar you are with the mainline Street Fighter series, the easier it'll be to remember the moves in this game. Familiar Street Fighter moves do return here, and although some of them have different properties, like Ryu's Tatsu now being a Rekka for example, overall they're not too hard to memorize. The only minor criticism I have here is that a lot of the animations are seemingly lifted from EX2, and while this isn't inherently bad, I did notice it pretty quickly. Some of the animations also look pretty goofy, and I nearly spat out my drink the first time I saw Zangief standing light punch. Seriously, I don't know what's going on here, but I think NetherRealm Studios are probably jealous of this beautiful animation quality. The Street Fighter EX games have always felt like regular Street Fighter but on crack, so I'm happy to say that Street Fighter EX3 proudly continues this tradition. Its gameplay systems may not lend themselves to the most balanced fighting game ever made, to put it lightly, but I'd be lying if I said they weren't a lot of fun.
We get it, Carnage.
I hear you say,
The gameplay is awesome, and it is curing heart disease. But surely there's some other content that the game has to offer.
Man, I'm good at segues. There are a lot of modes present in EX3, and it can be quite the challenge to wrap your head around them all, but I've done my best. Firstly, we have Original Mode. This is essentially the arcade mode of the game, and after selecting your character, you're given the choice of fighting a team of 3. Selecting your next opponent reminds me a lot of Street Fighter 3, but it's been given a boost here by allowing you to fight multiple enemies at once. Before the fight begins though, you're also given the choice of earning medals by completing certain tasks, and we'll get into the medals in more detail later on. After winning your first fight, you can select one of the opponents to join your team, and the mode continues from there. Having multiple characters on your team lets you juggle their life bars, and this introduces long-term strategic elements into the game. You could stick with the same teammate the whole way through if they're a character that you really like, but switching them out for a character you're less familiar with can keep the first one alive for longer. You progress through a series of tag team fights until you reach the final boss, M. Bison. He can be pretty tough, but if you manage to defeat him, you get to read through your character's ending. After this, you then fight a series of brand new enemies in a Tekken 4 style beat 'em up during the credits. And by the way, this is straight out of Devil May Cry. Although most fighting games have a standard series of fights for their arcade mode and call it a day, the developers behind EX3 went above and beyond in curating a truly unique experience, and I found myself playing this mode multiple times to see what new content I'd unlock next. It's always fun to go through original mode with your favorite characters and pummel the enemies that stand in your way, so we're off to a pretty good start here. Next up is Arena mode, and this is home to a bunch of features. You can battle other people here for regular offline battles, or you can spice it up a bit with dramatic battles. These have been taken from Street Fighter Alpha 3, and they let you do 2-on-1 or even a 3-on-1 battle with other people or the CPU. Hell, the game even supports the PS2's multi-tap accessory, and this can let 4 people play at the same time. EX3 also has Team Battle mode, where 2 teams of up to 5 characters can battle it out. This is pretty much just Team Battle mode from Tekken, but it's awesome to have in a Street Fighter game too. Arena mode also lets you fight special boss characters, mainly Bison 2 and Shin Bison. Being able to challenge these guys from the menu instead of having to play through original mode every single time is a nice addition, and it means that I can easily record footage, which is really nice. The first fight isn't too hard, and I was able to beat it on hard mode without losing a character, but the second fight against Shin Bison is totally different. This guy regenerates health, does insane damage, and seemingly has a Marvel vs. Capcom style magic series where he can freely cancel normals into other normals, and to top it all off, he seemingly has infinite meter. If you do decide to fight him, good luck, especially if you try it on hard mode like me. There's also a training mode here in EX3, and it's pretty standard. You can mess with the training dummy's movement and actions, and it's good for practicing combos. However, there's nothing here that I haven't seen before, but with how old this game is, I can't really complain, it wouldn't be fair. Finally, we enter character edit mode. This revolves around Ace, the game's brand new character. You know how your avatar character in Street Fighter 6's World Tour mode essentially uses a combination of moves that are taken from other characters? Ace is exactly that, and you can complete trials to earn experience points which let you purchase new moves. There are over 50 trials that come in 3 difficulty levels, and grinding through these is the key to earn more experience. You can give him all sorts of moves, and this mode provides players with the opportunity to create a character that truly expresses their style of play. Ace can be a deadly grappler, zoner, shoto, etc., and in theory the sky is really the limit. The only limitation is that you can have up to 6 moves, and moves can't have overlapping inputs, so you can't have both of these moves here at the same time, for example. Oh yeah, before I forget, let's go back to the medals that I mentioned before. They come in 4 types, and once you collect them all, you can unlock new features. Getting all the bronze medals lets you have Sakura act as the announcer, silver unlocks Bison 2, gold unlocks Evil Ryu, and platinum unlocks the aforementioned Bison fights in arena mode. If you can't be bothered getting all the medals the normal way, you can finish original mode a bunch of times with various characters to unlock these features. There's a lot of content here in EX3, and I haven't even mentioned that you have to unlock a bunch of characters by playing through original mode multiple times, so it's safe to say that if you like single player content in fighting games, this game will definitely keep you occupied. The more you play and experiment with the game's interesting features, the more content you'll unlock, and this creates a satisfying gameplay loop. Even if you're like me, a cheater who's using a 100% complete save file by the way, it's still enjoyable going through all the modes that EX3 has to offer, and as I've always loved getting dopamine hits from unlocking new characters in fighting games, I had a blast playing through all the modes here. This is something I don't really do in my videos, but during my time with EX3, I was really taken aback by its presentation and soundtrack, so I'd like to talk about these aspects for a bit. A recurring motif I noticed throughout the entire game is the Earth. Now look, I'm not going to become a YouTube armchair philosopher and attempt to drag this out for 7 hours with pseudo-intellectual opinions so far at my butt that my intestines come out when you attempt to take them out, but I noticed that quite a few Japanese games over the years have featured heavy imagery of the sky and the moon, and I've always wondered if there's a deeper meaning behind it. Characters can also jump out of the Earth's atmosphere during their supers, and I thought this was all really cool. It adds a lot of charm to the game, and as I've always been interested in outer space, this kind of stuff really sticks with me. The types of fonts and colors used for the menus and the game's HUD also screams this is a PS2 game, and while some may consider this to be dated, I think it's aged like a fine wine personally. Even little things like the way that the game's VFX looks or the menu sound effects are very evocative, and I can't think of any modern fighting games that possess these qualities. Games don't really look or sound like this anymore, and EX3 feels like a time capsule back to the early 2000s as a result. I don't know man, but this is one of the few games that really takes me back to when I was a little kid playing fighting games in the arcade, and to be honest, it was quite surreal, but in a good way. The whole game has this very upbeat and jovial presentation and tone, and it reminds me of when games prioritized fun over everything else. You can boot into EX3 and start playing the game in a matter of seconds, and although this will definitely make me sound like an old head, it's nice to play a fighting game that isn't trying to sell you cosmetics or other forms of DLC. To put it all into perspective, Street Fighter EX3 released in the same year as Windows 2000, the Sydney Olympics, the election and recount between George W. Bush and Al Gore, and the Marshall Mathers LP, which is considered to be prime Eminem. Hell, I wasn't even alive when this game was released, meaning that all of this is literally a lifetime ago for me. Moving on, this is something that we're all aware of by now, but this game has a ridiculous soundtrack. Every song is so unique and catchy, and it sounds like music that you'd hear playing in the real world at public gatherings. The songs you just heard are some of my favorites, although there are lots more amazing compositions found on the game's soundtrack. I didn't hear a piece of music that wasn't immediately brilliant, and there's a big reason why fighting game YouTubers like Maximilian Dude and Corey Gaming often use EX3 music in their videos. Hell, even I've used the game's music in some of my past videos, so it goes to show that people online from all walks of life can enjoy the game's soundtrack. It's easily accessible without lacking in technicality, and even though I know nothing about creating music, I assume that those who are much more educated than I am on this topic can also derive enjoyment out of it. The soundtrack also covers many genres, and although I'd love to cover them all, I feel that you get the point by now. The bottom line is that Street Fighter EX3 has a very special and unique feeling to it, one that's hard to describe with just words. It may sound like I'm glazing the crap out of this game, but I genuinely really enjoy it, and when something like this can make me feel nostalgic, I go hard with the praises. Although EX3 has a bunch of cool gameplay mechanics and characters, the game was released to a pretty reception. It currently has a 65 on Metacritic, and when you compare this to the other Street Fighter games on the website, its score is a bit harsh. The first review I could find was from Maxim Magazine's pre-release coverage of the game, and despite the review being shorter than my list of life accomplishments, they did state that the controls weren't as good as the first Soul Calibur game. I mentioned this in my first Soul Calibur video, but that game set the world on fire when it launched due to how good it was, so comparisons between these two games were simply inevitable. Once EX3 was released around the world for everyone to get their hands on, many other Western reviewers also weren't impressed. It wasn't all bad though, as the game's new tag team feature was appreciated, with GameSpot praising this new addition in their otherwise mixed review. A common conclusion I noted in the game's Western reviews is that even though EX3 was fun to play with friends and even single player, it simply failed to innovate on the series' formula, and that only the die-hard Street Fighter fanbase would truly appreciate the game. Over in Japan, gaming outlet Famitsu scored the game a 32 out of 40, so the reception from Street Fighter's homeland was seemingly positive, although I was unable to find the actual review for me to translate. After reading several more Western reviews for EX3, I noticed a trend where the game's animations and combat system were criticized for not being different enough to the previous games in the series, and I think this goes greater than just Street Fighter, however. The PS2 generation of consoles was being heralded as a true technical leap forward into something much greater than what people had become accustomed to during the 90s, and people's expectations for the future of Street Fighter would have been through the roof. Better graphics, higher quality audio, and fresh gameplay experiences were being raved about at an astronomical rate during the beginning of this console generation, and to say that people were excited would have been a major understatement. With EX3 sounding, looking, and playing similar to its older brothers on the PS1, I see why reviewers back then were disappointed, even if I think the game is really fun nowadays. The curse of being a launch title for a brand new console means that the developers just don't have the time to truly get familiar with how to create games for brand new systems, and a great example is the differences in visuals between early and late PS3 games. The same principle also applied to the PS2, unfortunately hurting Street Fighter EX3 in the process. Despite being the definitive end to the Street Fighter EX series, EX3's legacy still lives on to this very day. Released in 2018, Fighting EX Layer features many of the fan-favorite characters made famous by the Street Fighter EX series, and despite me not having played this game before, it looks like a lot of gameplay mechanics from EX are included here. Fighting EX Layer has received a few ports and updates to various systems over the years, and I'm tempted to make a video about them one day as it looks really fun. Although none of the Street Fighter characters make an appearance here due to Capcom not being involved with the project, it's still awesome to see these classic Arika characters in HD with brand new character models, and it makes me hope that we can get a potential EX4 or even an EX collection one day. Despite Street Fighter EX3's mixed critical reception, I personally had a lot of fun with the game. It gives you so many tools to do so many awesome things in a match, and this kept me coming back to record more and more footage. The characters all look and play super differently to each other, and the soundtrack is also killer, so I really can't say anything truly negative about this game and be honest at the same time. You know how I said just before that reviewers disliked how the game didn't innovate that much? I personally don't really have a big problem with this, what with how fun the previous games were and still are. Having more of the classic EX gameplay and animations just with improved visuals was good fun, and it's all I was expecting going in. If you haven't played this game before, I really urge you to. It's really easy to emulate on PC, and you can have a lot of fun in both single player and multiplayer, so give it a shot. Overall, Street Fighter EX3 feels like a really nostalgic relic of a period that has been lost to time, and I found the game to be very enjoyable. Okay, that's all I have for now, so thank you very much for watching my video, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.